Go. Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with John Frankel, a managing partner with, or an initiating partner, right? A founding partner with FF Venture Capital. Good afternoon in your case, John. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good morning.
Good. Well, thank you. And to start with, why don't you tell us all about FF Venture Capital and what the FF stands for?
So FF stands for Founder Friendly. And we sort of named the firm before it was cool and then uncool for VCs to use the terms founder friendly. But we really do work very much with our founders to help them succeed. We describe ourselves as the most engaged C-stage venture firm in New York. And we have an office in the US in New York, and we have an office in Europe in Warsaw as well. We like to invest when companies are just getting going. So usually that seed round, those seed has different terms, but sub $5 million round, usually a couple $1 million. And we carry on investing up to a $50 million valuation and then stop. So we're seed to early B. And when we've got 14 years of data. We started in 2008. And with 14 years of data, I can tell you that half of our seed funded companies end up raising a Series B. Now you might say that isn't that great. And I could argue that isn't that great. But if you look at the industry, only 10% of seed funded companies.
I'm in Silicon Valley. That is really good.
and if you blend that through, one of our companies pointed out recently that to get to 100 million revenue run rate for a startup, only 40 basis points or 0.4% of companies found in a given year ever get to 100 million revenue run rate. And they were celebrating they were there, and it made me actually go and look at the portfolio. We have 6 out of a total number of investments of 158 in the US. But if I back out the ones we invested in the last 5 years, about 100. And we've got 2 more that think they'll hit that number this year. So you look at that, we're running, at least one order of magnitude above the average there. So we resolve for higher survivorship. Our companies are generating about 1.1 billion in revenue. That's growing somewhere in the 25 to 40% mark. And we generate good returns. We have 3 top quartile funds, 2 of which we think are top decile. One of which is a ridiculous 12.9 times MOIC, which is nice if you can do that. I don't think we'll ever hit another 12.9 times MOIC fund in my investing career, but it's good returns for our LPs, and they're very pleased. We look at technology companies. We like applied AI in fintech, drones and robotics, about 60% of our portfolio. But we also go much wider than that. I mean, at the seed stage, you have to have a very open mind about what you're willing to look at. We study a lot and invest in very few.
Oh, very cool. And not everybody would be familiar with MOIC, so can you explain what that is?
Oh, I apologize. Multiple of invested capital. So in a fund, there's fees and expenses, which is some percentage. Let's say 25, 30% of the capital committed. The other 70, 75% is the invested capital. And so it's the multiple on the invested capital that we're referring to.
Very good. So there's been a lot going on worldwide lately. I mean, we've had a huge pandemic. We've had a supply chain crisis. We've had workforces becoming hybrid. NFTs all of a sudden are out there. What are some of the most, exciting emerging trends that you're seeing from an investor's point of view?
There's so many. I go to conferences, people tell us, what's the most exciting trend this year? Which sector? And I go, every sector. Every industry is being digitalized. You're moving from analog processes and analog records to digital processing, digital records. You're applying AI on top, and you're drawing insight out of that. So I'll give you an example. Out of our European fund, we have a company called RespoVision. What does RespoVision do? They can take any single camera feed of any soccer game and create a 3D point map of that game. Each player, think of them as a stick figure with, feet and ankles and joints, like 16-point stick figure that's now in 3D. So and then you can paint the 3D stick figure, a bit like FIFA 2008 at the moment kind of level. You see the players running around the field. So I have a video feed and I have this digital version looks similar. Then with digital version, I can say, what's it look like from the goalie's view? What's it look like following the ball around the game? You go, okay, that's kind of cute. But you can also say, hold on a second, which team players play well together? How they play today versus they played previously? This person seems to be limping, right? Implications for real-time sports betting, healthcare, insurance, scouting, training, the whole Moneyball aspect of it, all because you took one analog feed and then you can run that data. And of course, you got one analog feed. It could be a video of a game from 1975.
Interesting.
So you can do a lot, and that's just soccer. Now you apply all sports, so it starts to become fascinating what you can do just by taking what was analog, making it digital, and then running AI over it.
It's funny. I actually have a call later today with a representative of the U.S. Women's Soccer League. So
we should talk.
We should talk.
We should talk. They would love to. They're working with a couple of Premier League teams in the UK. They're actually looking at a couple other sports over here. That's one example. Let me give you another example. You know about deepfake video, right? We see a lot of deepfake video. We have a company out of Ukraine called Respeecher does deepfake audio. Now, we see that as like encryption technology, incredibly dangerous, incredibly positive, things you can do with it. A number of Disney characters, particularly in the Star Wars universe, have had their voice recreated or de-aged using their technology. They've won a couple of Emmys. Applications for movies where you can have set voices and be able to use them subsequently. But further applications, the voice actor behind Peppa Pig is just getting older. How do you stop that voice aging? How do you recreate, I don't know, Vince Lombardi's voice for a Super Bowl ad, for example? You use their technology, move it to real time, and now the person who's calling you from Indonesia or India or Pakistan or wherever can sound like a Midwestern mum in real time, because you can change the accent, change how the voice sounds, change the gender of the voice in real time. So and obviously there's a lot of, three-letter government agencies, applications you can dream of. It's a really interesting piece of tech stack.
I mean, there are actually just so many applications of that technology.
So they happen to be in the middle of what may be the beginning of World War III. Had the best month ever last month, signing huge contracts, out there fundraising, and that's their night job. Their day job is defending the country. So it's just kind of amazing what's going on.
Wow, yeah, you don't think about that, but they do have some other issues they're dealing with right now.
Some other issues, the CEO sent me a copy of Starlink, and he goes, "Look, it can double as a coffee table because the top of it is totally flat." They sent me a picture. I thought it was very funny. But yes, they have other existential issues to think about, as well as growing revenues and and customer base,
and rightfully so. And we won't go into that at all. That's a whole different discussion. So, well, now the other thing that came about because of COVID is, it pretty much everybody used to go into an office 9 to 5, and depending upon the field. But now it seems to be everybody's going remote. Does that help in any way with venture capital? Are there trends you see that are maybe worth investing in?
It's a great question. It's one I spend a lot of energy thinking about. I'll tell you now, I don't have the answers. I like to say that everything is a fad. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Telex is a fad, has a beginning. You may not be old enough, maybe you are.
I am.
We're going to weddings where people read out the telegrams. That seems not just quaint, but peculiar at this point. But that's where communications used to be. So there are definitely certain behavioral changes that happened during lockdown that were like a COVID bump. And some are permanent or long-term, right?
We're on one of them.
And the question is like, what's temporary, what's permanent? Like, you know, you're probably not wiping down your food with Clorox now. Clorox sales had a great bump. It's probably going to come back to whatever the trend line was before. Within what I'll call the laptop worker universe, people who were able to pick up their work on their laptop, go home and carry on working productively. There's a subset of them who will never, ever want to go into an office again. And that may be a pity. I think there's a lot of I think offices provide collaboration, congeniality, happenstance conversation, conflict resolution, and training, particularly for younger employees. But, you know, we have a company called Secure, hyper-growth company. They came into last year with about 180 employees. They now have around about 700. So they've been growing rapidly. Used to be a New York firm, right? You know, I'd call up the CEO, let's go out for lunch. Not only is he now in Park City, but the vast majority of people they've hired aren't in New York anymore. So just by necessity, growing through the pandemic, they were forced to be a remote first company. Yeah, I'm blessed. I have a whole bunch of kids and they're all married, and none of them, except where their jobs require it, want to ever work in the office again. So I think remote work may have gone from 5% of office hours to 25%.
Sounds about right.
And it may stick at 25%. It may drip down, it may go up, but fundamentally, we can work pretty functionally with most of our hours out, whether it's hybrid or fully remote. And I think it ties into another dynamic that even though pandemics are usually once a century, we probably won't see another one in our lifetime, though there are a lot of labs around where things can leak. So maybe. But, you know, gosh, I wish there was energy spent on regulation of that side of the world. But my central expectancy is we're not going to see another pandemic of this order. Nevertheless, people always fight the last war. And so they're like, you know, in my home, I probably want a nicer office. I might want a gym. I want a garden where my dogs can run, my kids can run, I can garden, or whatever it is I like to do. And so I think there's this move for more space. I think with the hyper-politicized environment that the pandemic did not help and probably amplified, you're getting political refugees in all directions. You're getting a lot more homeschooling. And you put that together, I think this move to Florida, Texas, low tax states, you know, one way to address inflation is not to have to pay state taxes. So I think all of that dynamic probably has legs to it. And the inability of this administration to repeal the cap on SALT deduction, to get technical, but basically means the federal subsidy for states means that state taxes in high tax states probably have some buoyancy to go up as opposed to going down. So all of that seems to be feeding that dynamic. So I think home tend to be a little bigger, tend to be more the focus of where you are versus job.
Yes.
And employers used to have to say, I need to hire the best person in this zip code. And, you know, you go to recruiting firms, we're looking at some of this characteristic who works in New York. Now you just don't say who. I mean, you don't. So it's
Right.
Do you want the best person in zip code, or do you want the best person? You want the best person.
Right.
And that is leveling out salaries, not just within the US, but around the world as well.
Well, yeah. And then, I'm in California, you're in New Jersey, which are known to be high tax states. And I have friends that have moved out of the state. I assume you do too.
I'm running out of knowing people who continue to live in California.
Yes. Well, I'm one of them. And we won't talk about that anymore.
Well, thank you very much for funding everything for those who left.
Well, you're welcome. So the other thing that's going on is the NFT and the fintech. What's buzzing in that? Well, fintech in general is buzzing, but NFT is a subset of that. What are your thoughts on that in general? We talked a little bit about this earlier. So
I don't know how to encapsulate them without it just sounding pat.
Mm-hmm.
So we study and look at companies every week. We probably look at 50 to 75 deals every week. To date, we haven't invested in anything in the blockchain space, in the quantum space, in the AR space, in the VR space. I think all those technologies have potential, but we think they're all early for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of technologies that we use today because of the benefits of Moore's law or Metcalfe's law.
Mm-hmm.
So the reduced the cost of processing, the ability for processors to run faster, cheaper, less hot, etc. We understand that. Metcalfe's law is about the power of networks. For blockchain technologies to work, we think you have to invent some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go back to 91, 92, someone says, wouldn't it be great if we connect all the world's computers together and they could like talk to each other and they could be networked? And you go, yeah, that's really cool. What's the application?
Mm-hmm.
And you go, Hamada. Maybe you'd say email, which came around in the late 80s and was a mainframe product. But email, I don't think it was until like 97 I sent my first email to someone else in Manhattan. It took about 40 minutes to get there. I could have sent a runner to do it quicker. There was a lot of stuff that had to be invented to make that work. But really it was the browser. And I think the first time I saw a browser was 93 or 94. And it's pretty cool. There was no back button. And someone showed me, hey, look, this is the weather on a browser. I go, what's a browser? Yeah. So it was that Netscape moment, the browser that unlocked the potential of this technology, allowed us to build most of the stuff we see today. And it was protocols, yes, but it was also inventions that sat behind TCP/IP, voice over IP, FTP, SMTP, these kinds of things that unlocked it. There's no law that says every N months you invent something, depending on how, irrespective, as a function of how bright people are, how much money is there. Mm-hmm. There's enormous money in the space. There's enormously bright people who are trying to find things. And look, we're only in the first decade. Maybe by the second or the third decade, someone will find something functionally useful in the space. Now, functionally useful is probably too broad a term, but for VC investment, we look for things that are sustainably 1/10 the price, or 10 times better than the alternative. And other than teaching millennials how to trade technically and pseudonymously moving currency cross-border, you really haven't seen this sort of great unlock of value that the technology has brought yet. Now that may change tomorrow. But now when you come to NFTs, it's fascinating. It's too expensive to actually put the piece of artwork on the blockchain. You put in what and so many people will disagree with this description. You're putting a URL, an address to a Web 2 server that's hosting it, that could be unplugged, tripped over. Someone could change what's on that target. And that's what people are buying for extortionate gas fees. So, I know people said, hey, what about putting medical records on the blockchain? Well, taking the MRI of, it probably costs you $100,000 to put it on. So it needs to be 1/10 the price, 10 times better. And we're not seeing that yet. Now, again, that may change tomorrow. There's some interesting protocols out there that are trying to do stuff. I've got people who are incredibly smart, I respect awfully well, who are like eyeball deep into this technology, making stuff work. So I have respect for them, but I haven't yet seen product that really works. And, some of the stuff sounds great on paper, like trustless systems, but I don't know how I can put this simply, but I don't know if I trust trustless systems.
It would be nice if we could. I know, I understand exactly what you're saying. And I think the barrier is what you said. It's the 1/10 the cost, or 10 times more efficient.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean,
that's a hard barrier to reach.
It is. Look, we've got a company that's doing drone delivery, last mile autonomous drone delivery of food. They're doing a suburb of Dublin, and 100+ deliveries a day. And at the moment, it's a little bit more expensive than the 10 to 15 euro. Sorry, take it back. The 8 to 10 euro it costs to have an Uber driver turn up, wait in McDonald's, collect up some orders, and ship it out. If it lives in 2 minutes 40, not 28 minutes, I think we can drive for cost sub $5, maybe even down, or sub €5, maybe even down to €1. At €1, it's revolutionary for last mile delivery. No one can get it. You're stuck at 8 to 10. And by the way, fuel, people, and cars are all getting more expensive. So 8 to 10 is going to 10 to 12.
Yeah.
So that fascinates me, because we believe it can deliver that, much better experience. Food's warm, product is fresh, and at a fraction of the price. So it's that kind of barrier we look to when we want to invest in companies.
Very, I could probably talk to you for hours. Fascinating, especially all the different ideas you must see on a regular basis. It would be, maybe
that makes this the funnest, and I love the term funnest, the funnest job in the world. We get to think about clean meat and stratospheric drones of 120-foot wingspan, and deep tech AI platforms, and as well as all the other stuff we've talked about.
Yes, maybe if I'm in your area, if you're here, we'll go out and have a nice dinner together and
I would love to do that. I would love to do that.
Mom's in Philadelphia, not too far from you. Maybe I'll go visit mom and pop up to New York. So to end with, why don't we, a lot going on. We talked about hybrid working and remote working before. What advice would you give a startup if they're coming to you and they want an investment? And what advice would you give them about how do you build your team?
So there's lots of layers of advice within there, and I'm trying to button this down. They clearly want domain experts. I've generally in life found, if you have people who really know how to do stuff, but they're rigid and they can't learn, you got people who don't know anything about it, but are highly flexible. Over time, the highly flexible people win, hands down. But so you want bright, flexible people. You want people who really believe in the vision, because there'll always be a bid out there for your staff. You want people who believe in the vision, and where there's goal congruence, where what they want out of life aligns with what you as an organization want from them. And if you get all of that, you can build an incredible team. it is more difficult in a hybrid and remote working basis to build culture.
Mhm.
And so understand how to do that is important. And it takes work.
Mhm.
And there are things you can neglect for a couple of years, which can have lasting impact if you're not careful on your organization.
Yeah. So, well, I was gonna say, one of the things, trends we're noticing is companies, instead of having that central office and take that money that they would have, like, you know, uh, an office space on Madison Avenue is very expensive. But if you take that money and put it towards everyone coming into the offsites once every 3 months, that seems to be the trend. Would you agree with that?
Well, people talk about it like this money has to be spent. So if you're not spending on space, spend it here. I don't look at it that way. I think it's the wrong way to think of your office space as sunk cost. I think you've got to find the right ways to move the culture forward.
Mhm.
And getting your people together is really important because, a Zoom world is highly scheduled
Mhm.
and there's no sidebar conversations.
Right.
And it's still connect with people at a personal level.
Mhm.
Everyone's kind of like different. The Zoom's image is kind of flat. I
Mhm.
find when you see people in person, firstly, they're all taller on Zoom,
Yeah.
except for the very tall people who are shorter.
Mhm.
But it's like you just don't get the measure of people in the same way. And so I think that's important. I think it's important that people know that they can connect with other people in the organization
Mhm.
in a more personal way.
Mhm.
And so getting people together into these offsites are important, but the offsites have to be designed so that the people don't just sit and ignore each other,
Right.
but get involved and engaged. So yeah, there is that.
Yes. No, I know. I agree. I apologize for I'm getting, there's a Slack going on and I can't close it. And it's,
I hear you being slacked to death there.
and none of them are for me, but it's just a channel I'm on, and I can't stop it. So I apologize for that.
Not at all. Not at all.
But John, it's been great talking. This is fascinating. I agree. I mean, I love technology, so I could talk to you for hours. There's so many things, and maybe we will meet someday and have a nice. I'm in the Bay Area, so maybe have a nice glass of wine and a dinner and talk about this stuff.
I do get out there from time to time, so let's try and make that happen.
That sounds good. Well,
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
thank you, sir.
Cheers.